We are taking a closer look at the media, how we get our news, the role of social media in truthful information, and how it could impact the way we all vote in 2018. I'm Christy McDonald. Stay with me. My week starts right now.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. It is all about the media this week on My Week. We're going to have a bigger discussion about the way we get our information, how social media helps shape our opinions, and heading into the 2018 election, taking a closer look at the issues media outlets are covering. We did a show like this right after the presidential election when journalists and media outlets were criticized for not listening to what people really had to say. In the last 2 years, throw in the reality of content manipulation on social media, and yes, the term fake news is still used daily. It's a good time to stop and take a look. So let's get right to it. You know our My Week contributors, Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. He also has a radio show on 9:10 a.m. And Stephen Henderson of Detroit Today on WDET and host of American Black Journal. So we have paper, radio, and television covered over there. And welcome back Lee Wilkins. She is the chair of the communications department at Wayne State University, and she specializes in media ethics and media coverage. Lee, it's good to have you back here again. And say hello to Garland Gilchrist. You might know him because he ran a close race for Detroit City Clerk, and he is now the head of the University of Michigan's new Center for Social Media Responsibility. Welcome, Garland. And your name is being floated about as a lieutenant governor candidate, possibly. We might get to that a little later on in the show, as we're always mining for news. But before we kind of jump in on this conversation, you have this new role at U of M and social media responsibility. Go ahead and give us an idea of what that's all about.
Sure. So at the University of Michigan School of Information, we started the Center for Social Media Responsibility because it's an important question. These companies like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have so much information about people who use the platforms. They also have so much information that flows through them. It's the lens through which so many people view the world. And it's important to ask the question, what are these companies responsible for? It's like a Spider-Man cartoon, you know, to whom much is given, much is required. With great power and great information comes great responsibility. So the Center for Social Media Responsibility, we dig into that question using research to make sure that we can get a full, accountable set of answers for those questions and working with policymakers and users to really understand what their responsibilities are as well.
Yeah, because someone's programming those algorithms that make the choice of what we see. So.
Absolutely, and algorithms are designed by people, and people have bias, and we need to understand that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start our conversation here. I'm going to ask each one of you, go around the table. And Nolan, I'm going to start with you. How would you kind of characterize the state of how we're getting our information, the media's role, and how we're getting things from social media in this past year and a half?
Well, I mean, clearly the social media has become dominant. I mean, it's not just in the past year and a half, but over the last several years, the role of social media in informing us has become, I would say, the dominant source of at least our initial exposure to news. Most of us enter the news now through a social media site, and I was very interested in what Garland's doing because I do think this issue of bias in how the social media presents information to us and how it selects which information to put first and which to put last is an important issue in terms of protecting our democracy, protecting our process, and making sure these third parties don't have undue influence over the electoral process.
Stephen, what about you?
So, I mean, I take a sort of historical view of all of these things because media has been with us since the beginning of communication, and there have been different sort of points along our history where a new kind of delivery system or platform really changes the way that we deal with each other. And I think social media is in sort of the infancy of its influence over communication in our culture, and it's performing poorly, I think is the universal assessment. But I think one of the questions is it performing more poorly than, say, the printing press did when it started to be used for mass communication? Is it performing any worse than television and radio did when they came along? I mean, there are these points along our history where we have to figure out how these new platforms, which enable us to do things in a different way and communicate with each other in different ways, we have to figure out how to use them responsibly.
Do we have to start at zero just because it's a new platform? I mean,
but we always do.
Yeah,
we learn something from
we're inherently
those other
human as well, and we're also making
Mm-hmm.
the decisions about what news is being covered in newsrooms. And we're having that question every day. Lee, let me go to you, and why don't you tell us what you're thinking?
Well, one of the things about social media that I love in a way in the last 18 months is we've sort of ripped the cover off of it and said, there are things going on underneath here that as folks who look at the news and who consume news, we're not aware of. One of the things that I think is good is that we all are beginning to understand that it's not a matter of being well educated, it's not a matter of being literate. We are all subject to fake news, to believing fake news. So it's not just the platforms, it's not just the algorithms. It gets back to what you said. It's about us as human beings, what we're attracted to, what we think is worth sharing. And all that is sort of, to me at least, the deeper stuff about social media that we're just now beginning to get clues about.
And also what we like to hear.
Yep.
And sometimes being very attracted to people who are saying the same things that we think. Garland?
Yeah, well, another piece of this too is, again, these social media platforms are designed experiences. So they're designed to optimize for engagement, for sharing, for comment, for debate. And we need to think about, is that what we want to optimize for? Can we optimize for learning? Can we optimize for productive discourse? Can we optimize for conversation? And these design choices are choices that the companies can make, and they can make differently if the incentives are different. But what are we incentivizing in this market is a real question, and we want to dig into that.
Lee?
Can we optimize for some sort of a platform that doesn't ask us to divide ourselves into people who are my friends and people who aren't my friends? The part of Facebook that everybody says, and it's true, has been used to divide us is baked into the way that platform itself was invented. It's taken us a while to figure out that in the process of connecting with my friends, there's a whole bunch of people that I'm choosing not to connect with. And as a journalist, as somebody whose job it is to inform you about people who are not like you, that's a place where Facebook and platforms like it have really become, in my view, kind of invidious and a serious, I don't want to say threat, but a serious challenge to our normal democratic ways of doing things.
Real quick, Stephen.
I guess one of the questions is, so we say that Facebook was designed to do what it does, but isn't a lot of it just sort of accidental and market driven? I mean, you have a kid in a dorm room who writes an algorithm on the window, and several years later it becomes this huge social media engine. I mean, I thought when Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress, it was really evident that he still is trying to figure out what he has created and what it should do. Now, he's also pocketing billions of dollars.
I was just going to say, I think you're taking maybe a little bit of a naive approach.
Well,
I think he understands where he
I don't think he knows what, well, the question I thought was the most interesting that he got asked was, what is Facebook, right? What is Facebook? And he couldn't really answer it. He said, look, it changes all the time in terms of how people are using it and what the expectations are. And I don't want to give him too much of a break because I think, again, he's a billionaire, he's an adult, he should be acting more responsibly. But there is some zeitgeist to what he has created that I think has to do with the culture more than it does the company itself.
Well, Stephen, that's why it's important that we have more people thinking about what responsibility means in this whole information ecosystem. We cannot rely simply on the platform companies or the people who create them to make those choices. Media makers have a role to play. Users have a role to play. Advertisers have a role to play, and really we haven't talked enough about what the responsibilities are of advertisers in this ecosystem, because if you think about it, the question that I would have liked to have seen asked in that testimony is, who is Facebook's customer? I think our perception is that the users are the customers of Facebook, but we don't pay them anymore, right? And so
No,
because of
we're
that,
not
that changes the
customers.
incentive.
Right.
But I think if you ask a rank and file Facebook user, they would think that
They think
Facebook is
they
built
are
for
the
them.
users.
But
yeah.
I mean, to Lee's point, I mean, this platform that was supposed to expand our universe has enabled a lot of self-segregation. We isolate ourselves in very comfortable pools of people, people who tend to share our views and agree with us, and we don't get a whole lot of exposure in the same way you did when mass media was dominant, and you were forced to listen to and hear views that might not be your views.
Well, you didn't have as much choice. All right, and speaking of that, we went out, we wanted to ask people, and just kind of did a little bit of a man on the street situation and said, where are you getting your news from? Where are you getting your information from? So this is what they said. Take a look.
Me personally, I get a lot of my news from the New York Times. I feel like it's a credible news source. You know, there's a lot of stuff on Facebook that's like, I feel like it's just clickbait. They're just trying to get, you know, a certain side of news out there. So I think the New York Times, through all this, has been pretty credible.
Nowadays, especially being, you know, part of like millennials and the younger generation, it's so easy to get your news from like social media platforms and things of that nature, like Twitter, Facebook. But I know, you know, there's some bias towards that, and there's definitely, you know, I think credibility plays a huge part in that.
The last election was the first election that I voted in, so basically I get all my stuff from Twitter and social media. That's how I find out about stuff. Like popular posts is basically like how I figure out what's going on in the world, or any like Twitter moments that's like a popular compilation of like tweets that have been like retweeted a lot.
I don't get any of my news from social media. I try to avoid it as much as I can.
Did you ever?
I think at one point I did, but again, it was only for credible news sites.
A lot of times something will spark my interest on Facebook, and then I'll do some more of my own research through some Google searches, basically.
As far as political news goes, I feel like I more so do my research versus just kind of sticking to one news source.
No, I think it's great because we're playing this sound, and all of a sudden we're starting all these side conversations like, what's a Twitter moment? Oh, hang on, and those moments are manufactured, is what Lee said. But I think what the interesting thing is we're all deciding and choosing where we want to get our information from, and all of those different things have different slants. Lee.
Well, one of the things that the research pretty clearly shows is we say we get our information from Twitter, we say we get our information from social media. What we don't say is, where did Twitter get that information? Right. Where does social media get that information? So if you on your Facebook page get something sent to you from the Washington Post, you may identify it as it's on social media, but in fact, it came from a legacy media organization. You know, it's much the same as people don't differentiate what's on TV. They just know it came out of the box. We just know somehow it comes out of the computer at us. That's part of just the way we're put together as human beings.
What's the click-through rate? I mean, you get these Twitter feeds. How many articles are actually clicked on? Same with Facebook. How many are actually read beyond the headline, beyond the initial tease?
Well, I think most legacy media would tell you that most of their traffic now comes from social media, from Twitter and Facebook, click-throughs there.
It's still a small rate.
So think about it like this, though. So when you see an article posted on Facebook or on Twitter, what you see a headline, you see maybe a blurb, you might see an image. Those are things that can be optimized by the person who is publishing that if they want to get a higher click-through rate. Again, when we're talking about these are designed experiences designed to maximize engagement as defined by sharing and commenting and liking.
So let me ask you this then. So how is this changing the way people are making their decisions in their lives, whether that's who they're going to vote for, what they're, what's going to be important to them? How is it changing?
Well, I mean, it's very crudely now. It's changing it very crudely, right? People are just taking it all in and making sort of snap decisions. But I think one of the things that I think gets lost in that debate a lot is the potential for this kind of democratization of information, right? This is the first time that a media platform really allows for us as individuals to make our own decisions about information, and we're doing it in a very primitive way because it's new. I still, again, hold out the hope that over time this matures and people's use of it matures in a way so that it helps us make better decisions, not more, not just faster ones.
But if we choose to seek it out, if we choose to
to-
go
we
and
have to change
find
to do
other things
Yeah.
like that, Nolan?
Well, I agree with Steve. It lends itself to snap decision making, and I think that's one of the problems. People see these headlines, see these blurbs, and there's no hierarchy of credibility. They just see it and they read it and they digest it. And I think that does lend itself to rash decision making. It also, I think, sets up a situation where it fuels emotional responses rather than people, sitting down and listening through a news article or reading through a news article. It's a lot of partial information, and you don't know always where it came from. I've said before, you go on Google, you see Twitter, and the New York Times has the same presence as Bob the blogger in his mom's basement. And it's up to the user to decide credibility.
Let me ask you this, Lee. Do you think what Nolan said in terms of evoking emotion and that kind of emotional decision-making response, do you think that is any different than what has happened in many years past?
Actually, I think there's a long line of research going back to the 30s and 40s that says the single thing that the media does best, TV, newspapers, radios, even the film, is we reinforce opinion that we already have. And I don't think Facebook and Twitter are any different in that. We aren't a blank slate. We as human beings aren't a blank slate. I think Nolan's right. I think it summons emotion. I think some of it does do that. And I don't necessarily think emotion is a bad thing when it's coupled with some rationality. There are political things that people ought get emotional about, so long as they're not solely emotional about it. And you can fill in what you think those issues are. But I, for example, think that people ought get emotional about whether or not we provide adequate medical care for people who are over 65. A lot of that comes out of my own personal life experience, but I think I can summon both rational and emotional, if you will, reasons for that, and that both of them have a place in political life.
Garland?
I think we need to take a step back and understand, again, we need to have a conversation grounded in reality. Emotion is not a bad thing. If we can understand sort of how and why people are feeling the way that they do and not be manipulative of it on purpose and not have the platform companies actually manipulate them. It's one of the reasons why at the Center for Social Media Responsibility, we're digging into actually building the reality scorecards about what does happen. How toxic is the conversation on Facebook? How much personal attack and aggression does happen on these platforms? What is the quality of the conversation? Once we know what the score is, we can then understand how we want it to change, and we can work with these companies to make better choices.
But Garland, throughout a day, you may be exposed, if you're a regular social media user, to as much inaccurate information as you are accurate information. So
Yes.
in terms of judgment and decision making, you really have to be a discerning user. And I think that's getting harder and harder.
It is, and you do as a user. There also are signals that can show how credible a piece of information is on the internet. For example, there's some really fascinating research that shows that you can look at the first handful of comments on a particular article posted on Facebook and get a pretty good approximation about whether it's misinformation or whether it's accurate.
But that's not as easy today. I mean, we sat through a demonstration in our newsroom a while back where we were shown videos of Barack Obama speaking.
Yes.
And you would have believed that he was saying everything you heard,
Right.
and he was saying nothing. In reality, he was saying nothing that you heard.
There was a video
And
that
it's-
Jordan Peele did on that.
It's getting,
Right.
it's getting so, the ability to manipulate the news is.
Well, I think that's part of a larger conversation of artificial intelligence and, the way technology is moving and it's changing how we perceive a lot of things.
Right, and we don't want to. What my concern is that we do need to think about emphasizing media literacy. How can we be more discerning? I think about that as a parent all the time. I have 4-year-olds and I need to teach them how to understand what they're looking at. At the same time, we need to understand that media literacy has limits in the face of manipulation. So there are other actors in this environment that have a responsibility to make sure that misinformation doesn't fester.
Okay, so we did go out and we talked to some more people about not only what the source of their news was, but also how do they trust their sources and find some different perspectives. And they were pretty honest about, yeah, I know this leans a little left and this leans a little right. It's kind of interesting. Go ahead and take a look.
Some of the podcasts that I listen to are more liberal biased, like The Intercept, for example, or something like that, where you have such a polarized view from the left side, and that's the same thing.
It's hard to kind of stay non-biased and see how credible is your source nowadays.
Do you trust all the stuff you see on social media?
Absolutely not. I do not trust it. That's mostly why I have to go see for myself.
Most of what I see on Twitter are people my age, and majority of it's liberal, and so most of what I see follows in line with my beliefs, so I don't really have that issue of like, oh, I'm not sure if this is true unless I go searching for other views, and then I'm like, oh, it kind of challenges my own beliefs.
The thing is, I do lean one way, but it would be nice to see the opposite side and to see what those other credible news sources are. So, I mean, I would like to have an open conversation. I think we can have an open conversation, but I think that it's about getting that other perspective that I don't think I'm getting even from New York Times. I feel like sometimes it's not always the other side of things.
Not always the other side. Lee, I'm going to let you jump in on this.
Well, I think they're being really honest about something that I just think is a human tendency. And I also think it requires effort. And one of the things about social media is it's quick and it's fast and it looks easy. I want to emphasize it looks easy, because being misled can be easy. It has devastating consequences for, if your chicken isn't really $1.59 a pound, or if the political candidate that you thought you were voting for turns out to be something other than the person that you thought you were voting for. But I mean, they're describing me. Most days I'm busy, I have lots to do, I am selective about what I attend to, and I understand that what I attend to is not my entire universe, and it may not be all right, but I'm doing the best with what I've got.
Let's take a look at where the media stands right now. Traditional media outlets, we've talked about social media in terms of covering 2018. Journalists and media outlets were lambasted after 2016, saying you didn't listen to the right people, you didn't talk to the right people, you have no idea what was really going on in the country. So, what has happened in the last year and a half? Have media outlets changed the way they've done their jobs? Have they taken that criticism to heart? Are they covering the right issues that should be covered? I'm going to start with you, Nolan.
Well, I don't think we've learned a whole lot from 2016. There was a big flurry in the months and weeks after the election to go out there and talk to the real people, or the middle of the country, or whatever you want to call it, the people that weren't talked to before the election. I think I got tired of that very quickly. I mean, for a lot of reasons. Some of it, they didn't like what they were hearing, perhaps, but I still don't think they're talking to, I think they spend more time talking to each other than they do a broad swath of America. They talk to the people in their circles and around, sort of the media centers in this country. But they don't get out much in any real way. When they do, it's like, a science experiment instead of real interaction. I think you saw that, this week. Look at what a big headline was made out of the fact that Kanye West said he liked the president. Well, that's not such a startling declaration in a lot of places in this country, but it was to our major media outlets.
Well, it's startling because it's an African-American performer who once got on television and said George Bush does not care about black people. That would seem inconsistent with the idea of liking Donald Trump, who clearly doesn't like black people.
It would seem that way to you,
but I would say that nothing Kanye does surprises me. I'm just throwing it out there.
We can have a whole discussion about why people are looking
on the
to.
Next MiWeek. Thank you.
Why are you looking to musical performers?
Steve is my dragon spirit.
I think I actually disagree with Nolan about what has changed in media. I mean, I think it also depends on who you're talking about, right? National media have been obsessed with the people who voted for Trump and the communities that they live in since the election. They've got far more people stationed in those places. They're writing a lot of stories about that. I think in some cases to the exclusion of critical analysis of what's really driving those folks and the racial dynamics and the economic
But you have to
dynamics.
look at how they're covering those communities. I think it'd be an interesting experiment for us all to watch the coverage of the Trump rally in Macomb County,
which will be coming
Saturday.
up this weekend.
Do
Saturday.
they cover it, with a biased eye or an unbiased
And I'm
eye?
going to say that points to we really need to look at our local coverage, and that's what's really shaping people's opinions, Lee. And we are running out of time. Go ahead.
So local coverage, I want to pile on to something that Stephen said. One of the things that I think has changed is that news organizations are now gearing up to be able to debunk rumors in real time. You saw that with the Las Vegas shooting, where both the Washington Post and the New York Times, in real time, were running stories that said, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true. Now you can say, well, that's something journalists should do, or you can say, in a time of very scarce journalistic resources, do we really want to be spending our precious time and effort doing that? But it's changed.
Darla, I'm going to give you, we've got 20 seconds left. I'm going to give you the last word on this.
I think that notion of fact-checking and having that being integrated into the media experience is something that social media has a unique opportunity to do, but we haven't seen that enough.
Would you be interested in public office again?
I am thankful for the support. I'm humbled to be considered, and I would consider it.
All right, had to get that in there. Garland Gilchrist, Lee Wilkins, Nolan Finley, Stephen Henderson, thanks so much for joining us. That's going to do it for My Week. Find us on Facebook and Twitter, of course, social media, and MiWeek.org. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next Thursday for My Week, but no fake news here.
I have a question. Who wants to go first to win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.